Carl Benjamin, Connor Tomlinson here. You guys have had quite a week, and it's only Tuesday. So can you guys catch me up to speed? What has happened this week? I know you guys have done appearances elsewhere, but what happened over there, and then what happened here once you got here?
Well, the Conservative Party have consistently betrayed their electoral mandate for 14 years, flooding the country with over 1 million legal and 50,000 illegal immigrants every year, imprisoning us in our homes for 2 years for what ended up being a mild cold, and then threatening...
Sorry, it was quite a severe cold.
For some people, yes. For the majority of the population, it wasn't.
There's an age gap here.
No, it was a severe cold. Let's not underplay it. I'm joking.
Yeah, quite
obviously.
And then tying our liberation to the threat of vaccine mandates, and then they were completely befuddled when they said, well, we can't track to the right because that would be illiberal. We must remain the centre ground. And then wondered why their entire voter base abandoned them and was wishing them to get 0 seats. We were both in the Conservative Party, me quite vocally, Carl quite quietly, but we had been hoping to attend and report on Conservative Party conference, as I have done for the last 3 years, and to vote in the eventual leadership election, whether or not the Conservatives would actually consult their base this time, because of course Boris was democratically elected, removed from office, Liz Truss was elected by the membership, cooed out by the banks and her own party, Rishi Sunak was installed, and despite diversity being our strength, delivered them into electoral oblivion. So we thought this time, hey, we might vote for someone like Suella Braverman, who's making all the right noises at this conference. And right before Suella Braverman's speech on Monday morning, we both received an email in tandem saying that we had been suspended from the Conservative Party, reasons pending. They said they were going to send us a list of our offending social media posts, probably just all of our greatest hits that we'll stand by. And then a few hours later, so they asked us not to publish the email. So we obviously did.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, and it racked up between us well over 1 million views on Twitter. A couple of hours later during Suella's speech, the party chairman, who, by the way, had parachuted himself into a safe seat, was utterly hated and won by about 600 votes in a recount because he sent the wrong leaflets out and said he was in the wrong constituency. He then resigned. So his last gasp was to purge the party of potential dissidents that would stop the Wets, the Liberals, from maintaining a consensus continuity candidate. He vanished. And so we are now very much on the outside, and the Conservative Party seem to have cemented their legacy as being a party of traitors who are unwilling to listen to the concerns of the electorate and are trying to render themselves impenetrable to, ironically, reform. So it seems we'll have to make our home elsewhere in UK politics.
Okay.
Just to say that Connor has understated the level of the betrayal of the Conservative Party as well.
Okay.
He's summarised it for brevity, but I really want to go a bit further on this. The low tax party has created the highest tax burden on the British taxpayer since World War II. And what have they done with that tax? Well, they've poured it down the black hole, which is the NHS, which, of course, if you bring in 1 million new people a year who haven't paid into the system, are just a burden on the British public to pay for their healthcare. So it becomes a kind of international health service. They have also allowed these people, not even allowed, they've paid for these people out of our tax money to live in social housing, and they've given them public benefits. And so they decided when we left the EU, okay, we won't have mass immigration from Europe anymore, but the Europeans and North Americans are really the only net taxpayers in the country, aside from the native British. Everyone else, the graph you can see just shooting upwards from non-European, non-American immigration. MENAPs, as they call them. They are, of course, a net tax burden. So we are paying for, for example, one great statistic to really illustrate the problem is that there are, of all of the Somalians in Britain, 72% of them are being paid for to live there by the British taxpayer.
What was that number again?
72%.
Boy.
Yeah, it's bonkers. So we're just literally paying Somalians to live in Britain for some reason.
Okay.
They, of course, don't work, or they work in the dark economy, so they don't pay taxes, by and large. And it's just like this throughout all of these immigrant communities. They are not net taxpayers. Half of them don't work because, of course, they've got very traditional lifestyles, and so their women are in the homes and the men aren't working in very well-paid jobs, and they're claiming lots of benefits. They're taking money out of the system via housing support schemes or via the NHS, or just because they don't earn that much and therefore the government decides they need to be subsidised. The level of betrayal and exploitation of the British taxpayer is, I mean, we're putting a brave face on it, but it is genuinely shocking.
Right.
And you would think that someone like Suella Braverman, who represents, I suppose, the right of the Conservative Party, would have something said about, oh yeah, we didn't even talk about the mutilation of children and proliferation of woke that happened under the Conservatives. The Conservatives have been in power for 14 years. Wokeism's been around about 10 years. How did Britain go woke? Who did they go woke under? They oversaw the institution of the Tavistock Clinic, which is the clinic that performs the mutilations on children. And it's just mad that this has been the right-wing government of the country doing it. So, and again, I'm going to stop there because I could continue to go on.
Well, we were in the audience for Suella Braverman's speech, and she seems to have echoed quite a bit of your criticisms of the Conservative Party.
The right-wing criticisms.
Right-wing criticisms within the party.
Yeah.
And where do you think that leaves her? And how significant is that right wing of the Conservative Party?
The right wing of the Conservative Party is locked out of power from within the Conservative Party because of what essentially is, some kind of electoral rigging system from within the Conservatives, because they have internal elections, they have internal mechanisms. Yeah. And today we found out that Mark Francois, who's a reliable Brexiteer, leader of the European Research Group, and on the right of the Conservative Party.
So like successor leader of that group, by the way.
Yeah. He was raging, and this was posted on Twitter by various news outlets, that there was a stitch-up, there was a fix within the Conservative Party. Because, of course, if they're going to put it to the membership, they'll get another Liz Truss scenario, where they'll vote for someone who is right-wing and who is going to do what the membership actually wants. And so they've obviously preemptively decided to stitch this up. I mean, Rishi Sunak is still the leader of the Conservative Party, despite leading them to the worst defeat they've ever had. And this means that the right in Britain, the right-wing public, and the public aren't generally quite right-wing, especially on social issues. They're quite conservative about them. Maybe we shouldn't be doing that. They're not going to be represented in Parliament, of course, for 5 years because it's Labour, but they're also not going to have any opposition to speak of, apart from the figure of Nigel Farage and the Reform Party. And that's pretty much all we've got, and we're essentially at the moment locked out of power.
To get granular about this, at the election there were a handful of Conservative backbenchers that were genuinely conservative, and of course they were never let into the cabinet because they wanted to keep the manifesto promises. People like Nick Fletcher, who went and led the inquiry into sex education in schools, very much like what's happening in the States. The same thing has happened under the Tories. They introduced that legislation in 2019, guidance that then became a mandate to teach children that there were 72 genders. And Miriam Cates, who has spoken about birth rates, demographics, immigration, a friend of our show and the like. These people were valiant warriors for the exact kind of principles that we agreed with, and because the party had made their reputation so radioactive, they lost their seats, while the types like Caroline Noakes, who was pushing for 50-50 representation in Parliament of men and women, according to arbitrary quotas, retained it. So the rump of the Conservative Party are the exact kind of people that have led them into their oblivion, and by kicking us out, by saying, as of today after Suella's speech, that we will do everything we can to prevent her from becoming leader. That is the title of an op-ed of a potential Conservative candidate, Ian Dale.
Wow.
They are...
Well, he was temporarily a Conservative.
He was. He tried to run in a constituency called Tunbridge Wells, and then a recording emerged that he had said, I would like to live anywhere except Tunbridge Wells.
I hate Tunbridge.
Suppose the irony.
Okay.
They are.
He just resigned off that, exactly.
Well, sure, yeah, no way.
And then went straight back to the mainstream media, denouncing people that said, like David Curtin, that said that the traditional family is the best model for children to be raised in. They are completely inflexible and unwilling to admit fault. And Suella, in her humility, is admitting fault. And unfortunately, her closest allies have abandoned her. Danny Kruger and one of the lords that had essentially established her career have fallen behind another potential leadership candidate before he has even announced that he's going to become leader, because they want to head off at the pass another continuity candidate. So what's happening is the remaining members of the Conservative Party that are actually Conservative consist of two former Home Secretaries, Priti Patel and Suella Braverman. Suella Braverman, by the way, at the last NatCon in the UK, I had gone on television and criticised her for being too liberal, because her entire speech was about being the daughter of immigrants, Britain is welcoming, and this NatCon she comes out and says liberalism is the problem. Excellent. I'm glad that she's on board. If there are two Home Secretaries that have been deposed from their jobs, they are the only ones that are interested in making the Conservative Party more right-wing, and the party is saying, we don't want you anywhere near power. it's clear that the natural home of Conservatives is no longer the Conservative Party, including their own MPs.
And I think it's worth also talking about this sort of power balance within the Conservative Party that has happened because of this great bloodbath of the Tory MPs. They lost, what was it, 251 MPs in the last election? Yeah. There are 650 seats, and the Conservatives had somewhere around 380 of them, and they've lost 250 of what they had. And so this has been seismic, absolutely seismic. But there's an interesting pattern that emerges, because the safe seats are those seats which are congenitally Conservative. And there are some seats where, like with Labour, they've just never not voted Conservative. So this constituency would have been created in like 1918 or something like that, and every single year since the constituency was created, it returned a Conservative MP. And so the Conservative Party itself, the internal machinery, is very aware of this. And so when David Cameron took over and in 2010 became Prime Minister, he bragged about this in the Times. He says, look, the Conservative Party was pale, stale and male. It was not diverse. I did something about diversity. And so what he did is he parachuted minority and woke candidates into these seats. Now, what this means is that after the bloodbath, even in the safe seats, everyone took a massive hit, but they managed to scrape through with 121 MPs, I think it is, left. And so now the rump of the Conservative Party that's left is disproportionately made up of those parachuted in woke diversity hires who are not actually representative of the base, but they are what a power base that's left in there, which is a real problem.
Well, one of my favorite writers, Brit writers on the right, is Peter Hitchens. And I know that you guys have also benefited from his work in various ways. But talk about his role now in this whole thing. And I know you've done it publicly, so I don't think I'm outing you in any way. But can you talk a little bit about, you've hung quite a bit around his neck for the most recent sort of attempt to kill the Conservative Party even more than it already is. But talk about his, who is Peter Hitchens in this, this situation?
Are you nuanced?
You can be nuanced if you like. Would you be good cop? I'll play back.
I'll be the good cop.
I love Peter Hitchens.
Right, Pete Hitchens is a very experienced Conservative journalist. He's been a member of the Conservative Party for many years. And when David Cameron took over in 2010, or when he became Prime Minister in 2010, he was very staunchly against the kind of Conservative Party that David Cameron would create. Because David Cameron was just a continuation candidate from Tony Blair. Right. He had adopted all of Tony Blair's precepts. I mean, he said that gay marriage was his proudest accomplishment, for example, and not despite being a Conservative, but because he was a Conservative. So, okay, we can see that we're looking at just Tony Blair 2.0.
And Peter Hitchens wrote The Cameron Delusion.
He did. He was very much. Right. He completely prescient. He was completely on point. He was absolutely correct, saying, "Look, David Cameron is going to turn the Conservative Party into Labour 2.0. That's going to destroy the Conservative Party. And so the only thing we can do is destroy the Conservative Party it's going to destroy Britain using the Conservative Party as a sort of Blairite skin suit. And so we have to destroy the Conservative Party if we want to save Britain." And a lot of people agreed with this. And come 2024, when it seemed actually he's got a point and Nigel Farage is running, and it looks like maybe we could destroy the Conservative Party. Unfortunately, Pete Hitchens decided that it was actually too close to the knuckle, maybe. Maybe he thinks that Starmer's too radical or something like that. Because he said, no, okay, we can't vote for Nigel Farage because he has a personal problem with Nigel Farage. And he thinks that he couldn't win under the first past the post system, which evidently wasn't true. So he got 5 seats. But he also said, right, but we have to vote against Labour. So, okay, you're on the horns of a dilemma there. You can't vote for the right-wing party, and you can't vote for the Labour Party. And when I say the Labour Party, I also mean the Greens, the Liberal Democrats, and any other sort of minor workers' party. It basically is the left, goes on past there. Right. And so the Conservative Party, the Reform Party is the right-wing party, Labour and the left are on the other side. And so he's saying, right, you can't vote for either of these. So, okay, well, that only leaves one option left, Peter, to vote against the Labour Party. And so he is indirectly and tacitly endorsing the Conservatives out of fear of a Starmer government. Now, I personally think this is a bit misplaced because a Starmer government was coming whether we liked it or not. The Conservatives had massively dropped the ball. For 2 years, they'd been literally polling at half of the Labour Party in the polls. These were not outlier polls. These were completely consistent, completely predictable, and everyone knew that the Conservative Party were going to get absolutely thrashed because no one wanted Sunak. No one asked for him. No one wanted his agenda. No one wanted what he was selling. People were going to stay home. The Conservative voters, they don't defect to Labour when they're unhappy. They just stay home. And so the Labour vote share, in fact, in this election has actually gone down quite significantly, but it's allowed them to gain a huge majority. And this was going to happen anyway. And so you may as well vote for Nigel Farage as a form of protest or help bolster their position. But Peter is labouring under the belief that the polls were nonsense, he told me. And so actually the Conservatives may well have won, in his opinion, which I think is not likely.
Okay.
Matt Goodwin put the numbers of 2019 Conservative voters that were going to stay at home at 6 in 10. So it was never feasible that all of those who ended up voting Reform could have ever been persuaded to flip for Conservatives. Many of them would not have voted at all had Nigel Farage not come along and taken the reins of Reform and made it a tenable right-wing opposition. I've been arguing that with Peter recently, and I've been putting across the position that I was an admirer of his work, and I still appreciate things like the abolition of Britain, which accurately diagnosed Tony Blair as the architect of our immiseration. And many young men looked up to him. I mean, the phrase around the election from Dr. Parvini was 0 seats, and he was a spiritual leader of 0 seats. And for young men like me, for him to turn around and say, not only is this election not a foregone conclusion, but you actually have to, and he would say vote against Labour, but in real terms that means vote for the Conservative Party. Betraying the advice you gave us for ages. Betraying the advice actually about a year ago that he had given to me when I said, okay, you were right in 1997, what do we do now? And he said, well, you should have read my column in 2003 and destroyed the Conservative Party then. I was 5, Peter. Sorry, couldn't do anything. Not only did he do that and burn his credibility with young men, but then he will not admit that Reform is now the tenable opposition in 98 seats where they came second. So actually, a vote for the Conservative Party is essentially a wasted vote, especially in what we call the Red Wall, which is, before 2019, anywhere in the north was almost guaranteed to vote Labour because of the resentment against Maggie Thatcher. That's now been shattered by Boris, re-erected because they hate the Tories, but not with overwhelming Labour support, instead they actually value Farage. So
just a quick thing on there. We actually know this as well because YouGov did a poll of Labour voters to ask them, why are you going to vote for Labour? And 48% of them returned, I just want to get the Tories out of power. Only 5% of them said, I support Labour policies.
Okay.
So they
devastating.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have been persuaded. And so Peter, when this has been put to him, will say, you didn't understand my point. You're being a petulant child. You're willfully misrepresenting me. And I was just saying to him, no, look, I understand your argument. I think it's weak. Here are the facts. And fundamentally, you have let down an entire generation of men who looked up to you for political advice. We were at the finish line. We had a real opportunity to remove this party that was body blocking an actual Conservative party. And you fell at the last hurdle. So much like the Conservatives, the demolition of their credibility is on them, and the demolition of Peter's credibility among men my age is on him.
And what's important to remember about Pete Hitchens is he's got one of the most widely read columns in the Sunday Mail amongst 65-year-old voters.
The boomers.
The boomers, yeah. He is a powerful voice among that demographic.
Sure.
With good reason. He's a great writer. He usually makes very incisive observations. And so his influence there, I think, is a factor as to why the Conservatives managed to squeak through more than 100 seats, which is what the actual goal of 0 seats, obviously, is a meme. But we wanted them to have lower than 100 seats. And Pete Hitchens definitely played a role in making sure they didn't. Because one of the things that the Conservatives were strong on fear-mongering against was the pensions. Starmer's going to tax your pension, and doubtless that got a lot of boomers out voting Conservative.
What's striking to me with the Hitchens thing is that it's not like you were reading his mind. It's not like he
was telling us this on Twitter.
And he was doing interviews everywhere.
Right. Well, and I mean that you weren't reading his mind about he wants to destroy the Conservative Party. It would be good if the Conservative Party were destroyed.
No, he's very open
it's not like it's not like back in the day he was said a few things that may be interpreted that way.
On GB News, every single ad break, they ran a promo from the Shel Dewberry show where he was a panelist last year. And he said, what we really need is 2 new political parties. And that was every 15 minutes, on GB News for a year. So this is very, very... And then a new political party emerges, and he disagrees with it based on vibes.
Well, it's based on personality conflict. He doesn't like Nigel Farage.
Okay.
On a personal level, he doesn't like Farage. I mean, Peter Hitchens saying we need to destroy the Conservative Party is just... It's like, was it Cato the Elder saying we must, and furthermore, we have to destroy Carthage.
Okay.
Right? He ends almost every sentence with it. Like there's a famous video clip of him going around saying, look, the Conservative and Labour Party are like two zombies propping each other up. We need to destroy them. And he's completely correct. He's been saying openly exactly we need to destroy the Conservatives for a very, very long time, which is why it's so disappointing now that when we had the opportunity, he was suddenly afraid of what that might bring.
The most telling part about this as well, is that Out Unheard, which is a British publication, they did an alternative election hustings, and the likes of Matt Goodwin came over and represented Reform, a Labour councillor represented Labour. To represent the Conservatives, they had Peter Hitchens. And he said, I'm not here to represent the Conservatives, I'm here to represent a vote against Labour. But it's like, you accepted the slot and filled it.
Certainly,
so you are endorsing voting Conservative.
You travelled to the studio.
Yes.
Right.
So you've just gone against your entire record.
As if there's no inferential power behind, okay, I'm not for Reform and I'm not for Labour.
Right.
Okay, well then you are for someone by your very act of not being for those two things. You know, so...
Yeah. So if the goal was to destroy the Conservative Party,
Yes.
did it work?
Possibly.
Okay.
It's too soon to tell. But
how will you be able to tell?
we'll be able to tell in the next few years just by opinion polling, basically, to see what actually happens with the Conservatives. I mean, there's a non-zero chance that Sunak, in 5 years' time, is still in charge of the Conservative Party. Right? That is a non-zero chance, and that would be ideal. Right? For Farage, if I'm a Reform supporter, that would be ideal because
an easy foil that stays consistent.
Exactly, and you know, he would be. I mean, that would be excellent because he led the party to the worst possible defeat they've ever had. You know, maybe another one is on the cards.
Okay.
But the good thing, and I know this doesn't sound like a good thing from the perspective of a Conservative Party member, but it's actually a good thing if the woke, lefty, wet Tories gain control of the Conservative Party and hold it with an iron fist. That's actually a good thing for the British right, because what we want is for the Conservative Party to have learned no lessons. We want the wokists to take over it, like they already have, maintain control of it, and make sure it can't do anything based. Make sure it can't make any based promises. Okay. Make sure it can't say, look, we've learned our lesson, we're going to get in power, we're going to get out of the ECHR, we're going to stop this immigration, we're going to lower your taxes, we're going to do all these good things. So that entire space, the entire British right wing, is still this giant void that Nigel Farage can move in to fill.
From what I understand, the Conservatives have been, breaking their promises, but making the promises ahead of time.
Oh, yeah.
So that it at least looks like there's some kind of contrast. Oh, good, I can put my hope in these people.
Yeah.
But if they stop making the promises, what you're saying.
Well,
so if they stop trying to appeal to this group.
People are very used to being betrayed by the Conservative Party at this point, right? Yeah. But now I think they're going to be at a point where they're not even going to make the promises. Okay. Especially when it comes to socially conservative issues. They're totally off that reservation.
I think they'll make overtures to it, because I don't agree that there's a non-zero chance that Sunak still stays in charge. I think he buggers off to California. And
I'm not saying it's likely.
I know, but I think the plan has been foreordained, and you can see this with the movement of power players who formerly backed Suella, now backing Robert Jenrick, the former immigration minister. It's been foreordained that Kemi Badenoch will be the leader of the Conservative Party, and she is constantly positioning herself as R-based black woman, a culture warrior who stands up against gender activism, but it's to protect gay kids from transgenderism, who stands up against the transgender advocates, but as soon as they tell her to be silent, like David Tennant, former Doctor Who actor, she said, how ridiculous a white man is lecturing me on. So she's playing the exact identity politics of her enemies. Yeah. She, at ARC, said, the problem with ESG scores is that they don't achieve their stated goals. And it's like, no, the problem with ESG scores is that it's gay race communism, Kemi. I don't want gay race climate communism. I'm actually opposed to all those things. She will be installed, and Michael Gove is one of her advisors. Michael Gove is what I can only describe as the limp-wristed bane of the Conservative Party, puppeteering things behind the scenes constantly.
Basically like Wormtongue from Lord of the Rings.
Yes, he's pathetic, and his chief advisor
in every capacity, I mean, literally, physically.
His chief advisor once said of Miriam Cates, an actual Conservative, that she is more National Socialist than National Conservative, about her own colleagues. So these are the kinds of people that are going to try and continue to have a stranglehold over the Conservative Party. And so what that means is the mask is going to remain slipped, and that's good for people like us, who won't waste our time trying to reform the Conservative Party from within. We'll build something from without that actually has legs and conviction.
Yeah.
How common is Peter Hitchens' personal problem with Farage?
Not very.
Not
Farage
very.
is quite well liked.
Okay.
If you look at the YouGov approval ratings, everyone has overall net negatives just because that's the way politics works nowadays. But for example, like Rishi Sunak had an 18% positive approval rating. Keir Starmer 22%, I think it was.
Okay.
Farage is 33%. He's very popular with the Boomers, very popular, and also quite popular with the Zoomers.
Very popular.
Because he's got everyone likes the rebellious streak.
Yeah,
right?
right.
The people he's not popular with are middle-aged housewives, actually.
Okay.
I know because I have a middle-aged.
Okay.
My wife isn't middle-aged,
Yeah,
but like I have a housewife, and I speak to my extended family and neighbours and stuff like that, and they don't really like his tenor. It's not that they dislike his policies; they dislike the way he's presenting himself. So hopefully he'll relax into his role as the sort of king in waiting, and present a more sort of statesmanly figure.
And still, it can be memed. He's much more easy to meme than.
Oh yeah, the memes are all out there. Yeah, the memes are all out there. They're all done. Yeah, that's a done deal. But no, Farage is a popular figure. He has a lot of cut through. He's great at delivering the message, and he's pretty solid on the points.
And he's the only one that understands social media because he's staffed his campaign with reactionary Zoomers who understand meme potential and who understand. Take a look at the Conservative Party's. If you want to understand how not to run a campaign, it's the Conservative Party's Twitter account, to the extent where yesterday they accidentally deleted it.
Okay.
And so 0 seats became 0 tweets. And the entire campaign, a microcosm of this, is that we had a scandal where Conservative candidates were betting on themselves losing their own seats with the foreknowledge of when the election was going to be. So it's a major scandal, right?
Yeah.
And on the day the scandal came out, they put, "Don't bet on Labour with a roulette wheel for higher taxes," and then immediately had to delete the tweet.
So of course, yeah.
Would you?
Oh boy!
To not grasp optics to that level, it's not shocking that you failed to win anyone over. Farage gets millions of views on a TikTok where he makes a joke about melons in a supermarket, and that makes Zoomers endeared to him, especially when they're looking around. Aaron Bastani, who set up communist outlet Novara Media, even though Bastani is slowly realizing that things are getting worse.
He became a dad.
Left-wing politics, yes, quite. He went to a town, Chichester, was it?
It was Chichester.
And interviewed some young men. And the young men were just saying, well, we're going to vote Reform UK. And he was like, why? And it's not because they've been dissuaded by Russian disinformation. It's because they said, we look at our town and we just see too many foreigners just walking around. And there are veterans sleeping on the streets and we know we're paying for these people, not these people. And Nigel Farage is the only person that's going to solve it. And so basically, Zoomers look at their civilization crumbling, they look for answers, and Farage pops up. And that's why they enjoy him.
The status quo is responsible for this state of affairs. And Farage, for all his faults, or for any reason you might criticise him, is very clearly outside of that consensus. And they're both on both wings of the Uniparty's backside. They're both attacking him. And so he's very clearly opposed to both. And what's interesting is that Labour MPs have already started singling him and Reform out as the opposition. They've only got 5 seats, but they've singled them out for destruction. Now, no, we're going to defeat Nigel Farage because they're not worried about the Conservative Party. The Conservatives still got 120 seats. Shouldn't this be, we're going to beat Sunak? No. They know they're crushed. They know they're captured. They know they're a controlled opposition. Farage is clearly not that. And so that's why I think one of the things that appeals to the Zoomers is like, well, this is the guy.
Well, they know where the energy is.
Exactly.
Even if nobody else does.
Exactly.
Even if former Conservatives do. That is fascinating to me. I do want to pivot a little bit. I know that you guys, so your Twitter bio says that you are a Zoomer Catholic reactionary, I believe. And you're not a Christian.
No.
You're an atheist.
Yes.
Okay. I assume that there are plenty of conversations around about that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'll get him a mention.
Are there? What's that?
I'll get him a mention.
Okay. Yeah.
Not really. I mean,
Not really. Okay.
we don't talk about it much, really.
Really? Okay.
Well, okay. There's always playful banter in the office because there's always room for disagreement at loads of senses. But I think it's fair to say that you, forgive me if I speak for you, live as one of the best Christians, essentially, that I know, but that you wouldn't deign to call yourself a Christian unless you sincerely felt a connection to God.
Yeah, I unless I had a moment of true sincere belief, then I don't want to LARP. I mean, it would probably be very profitable for me. I could probably do an American speaking tour, how this new atheist left new atheism and converted Christianity. And, I'm sure I could do very well if I wanted to, but it would be insincere and I would be lying, and I'm not a liar.
Right.
However, saying that, I'm a very strong ally of Christianity. I see Christianity as the traditional religion of the West, the traditional religion of England. I mean, England was formed as a Christian country. The pagan Anglo-Saxons had their minor kingdoms, but England itself was first put together by Aethelstan the Glorious, and he was a Christian. So it is the traditional religion of England, and therefore the traditional religion of the Anglosphere and the Western world at large. And I think that the atheists, especially the new atheists, are coming to the conclusion that maybe there was something good about Christianity, actually. Maybe trying to tear it down was an act of hubris and not liberation. And something else is filling the void. Basically, what I'm saying is I might be an atheist, but I am a bit up for a crusade.
Okay.
Just
all for it. I talked to Jeremy Carl, and he grew up Jewish, and then grew up, and I'd love to hear more about his story in particular. But he said that he knew that being dissatisfied with Judaism or being satisfied with the way he grew up wasn't the same thing as being a Christian, and it took him a long time to sort of get to the point where he was, okay, this is my faith now. And how do you see yourself in the middle of this? And like, would you be, you've got children, would you be pleased if they became Christian?
Oh yeah. I mean, my 9-year-old son is already very insistent that he's a Christian.
Okay.
And it's because he has to go to a multicultural school because, of course, Britain's a colonized country.
Okay.
And he's very aware that his friends who are Indian or Pakistani or whatever are not Christians. And so he doesn't know what he is. And so I'm more than happy to reinforce that identity with it.
Yeah.
And my kids were actually having an argument in the back of the car the other day.
Okay.
And my son just yells, "Dad, are we Christians?" Because my daughter had been arguing with him because she's a bit older and she doesn't know. I was like, "Yes, son, we're Christians." And I was, I'll never tell Connor about this. But we're Protestants, obviously, because we're English.
Yeah.
But no, I'm not actually Christian, but like culturally, I was going to say spiritually then, but that's not the right word. Mythologically, maybe, where I want to support the Christian tradition.
Right.
And in a way, I feel like I've got a bit of a disability or something, right?
Okay.
Because it's, I feel like everyone's like, well, why don't you become a Christian? It's like, why don't you just tell the guy in the wheelchair to stand up? I don't know, I don't know. I was raised in the sort of 80s, 90s, materialistic, atheistic culture where this just never came up, and I've got no experience of it. And I don't feel like I have a longing either, weirdly, and I'm not, in any way trying to, denigrate anyone else's experiences. It's just what my experience is.
Right.
But I can look around and say, well, hang on a second. I like Christianity. I like Christians, and I like Christianity. I think the teachings are good. How could you fault Jesus? There's a lot to fault Muhammad on. There's a lot to fault Muhammad on.
Right.
Can't fault Jesus. I agree that he's a moral exemplar, that is a worthy example for the children. And I like the fact that my son has made it a part of his identity. So I didn't push him towards it, obviously, but he did it on his own. He said, one day he said to me, "I want to be a Christian." I said, "That's great, son."
Yeah, through conflict, right? Through seeing people who had a strong religious identity.
I don't know where he got it from. It was just one day it was on the top of his mind, and he just said it, and I was like, "That's fine, son."
Yeah. Wow. And you're a Zimmer Catholic reactionary.
Yes.
And so, So, and how did you come to faith? Were you raised in the church?
So I was baptized. I went to an Anglican primary school that was all very sort of like grandma coffee morning, bad hymns, very light in theology.
Yeah.
2008, my uncle, who's very dear to my heart, my family took his own life and broke the family. And so they needed an outlet rather than going down the sort of therapeutic society route. And they reversed the church. So my grandparents joined the Catenian Association, did a lot of work with local homeless charities and found a lot of community there. My mum started taking me, and I was an impatient kid. I would rather go play my Xbox or something morning than do that. And so I had the listless teenage atheist phase. And then one of the many reasons I started coming back and converting was, as a lot of young men did, watch Jordan Peterson's biblical lectures. And so I had a very academic interest in first the moral foundations of the West
As well as a psychological personal interest that brings something to an individual.
Yeah, and various tumultuous events in my personal life led me to re-examine my own priors, and I started moving incrementally towards it. And there were a few things that sort of tipped me over the edge. It's mainly a decision out of humility. So the positive proof was with C.S. Lewis's in Christianity, which is if Christianity has worked in all times and all places and betters the lives of the people who at least nominally say they believe in it, either Christ is the best liar, a madman who just accidentally stumbled on the universal truth, or is who he says he is. And in the inverse, you tweeted out a meme that essentially got you in trouble with the British press. That kind of modern Pascal's wager, which is if our enemies are so hideous, so demonic, consistently worship the devil as an avatar of where they would like to see us end up. And if technology is a kind of Faustian bargain that replaces human relationships and dislodges us from one another in a sense of purpose, if that is consistently true, then if Christianity had predicted all of that thousands of years ago, what's the likelihood that that's the case? And so I subordinated that natural tendency to live in my own head, because I didn't, as much as I summarized you as saying you wouldn't say you're a Christian until you sincerely felt it. Yeah. I don't feel the sort of Donnie Darko beam of light coming out of my chest. You know, when...
Well, I do. I don't know what,
I don't know what you're doing. Well, that's what I'm waiting for.
Every day.
Yeah, that's the thing. I'm like a lot of Protestants to say I've got a personal relationship with Jesus. I don't necessarily feel something.
Sure.
But I am willing to say, as our mutual friend Nick Dixon said, in lieu of feeling that, I make the positive decision to say that just believe it, you idiot, because your contemporary doubts are less likely to be true than this thing which has worked in all times and in all places and is much better than the civilizational deterioration that we're living through right now.
And I just want to be clear as well about the sort of Pascal's wager. That's why I'm a Christian ally. Yeah. Like, our enemies are literally demonic.
Right. Yeah.
Like, they actually hate beauty. They actually hate truth. They actually hate goodness. They've decided to reduce all of these categories, the moral content of all these categories, to equalize them. Because, of course, the mad quest for equality means that any amount of judgment that is placed on one is actually an inequality against another. And so they have tried to harmonize the concepts. Well, you know all the concepts, I'm not going to go through them, but like, you know, the terrible things with the good things. And Christians are actually still able to say, no, good things are good and bad things are bad. And so it's like, right, okay, yeah, well, even if everything, I mean, I'm not saying this, but even if everything about Christianity was just nonsense on stilts, then it's still not evil nonsense on stilts, whereas theirs is evil nonsense on stilts. I'll choose the good nonsense on stilts. Thank you very much. You know,
would you say you want Christianity to be true?
I mean, I would like to believe it is, like, you know, because I see a lot of richness coming out of Christianity and through Christians, right? There's genuine sort of warmth in Christianity that's just not present in the sort of satanic leftism. And again, I'm not being flippant, but I call it satanic leftism.
Certainly, yeah.
I mean, the Church of Satan, the Temple of Satan, or whatever it is, they are literal leftists. Right. Like the left, I mean, they will literally glory in the repudiation of Christianity in a really resentful and hateful way, whereas I don't see the Christians doing that towards the left. I see the Christians being quite worried for the things that they love. And so the lodestone that draws one to another is resentment and the other is love. And so it's obvious that Christianity is what is wholesome and leftism is what is wicked.
Would you say that there's a distinct difference between... I would like to know how both of you reacted to the Richard Dawkins clip that got a ton of play, where he was talking about calling himself a cultural Christian in a similar way. How did the two of you react to that?
I actually made a video about it.
You did? Okay,
Starting on Cow Channel.
I missed it.
Because like that to me is the ultimate in sort of boomer hubris.
Sure.
It's like, you had, because the thing is, in a way, my parents are kind of the same with this, right? Because the boomers are a very atheistic generation. Very secular, but they had the event of being raised in a Christian society as a part of their background, right? So, okay, every Sunday they have to go to church until they're like 16, 18, whenever it is, until they can move out of the house and they can say, right, okay, I'm in the end of history now. I'm a liberated person. This is wonderful. Yeah. And my parents didn't have me baptized, and they didn't make me go to church, and I decided to make my children get baptized. Now, it wasn't entirely my decision. My wife again, wants to be a Christian. She wants to get baptized. It was traditional, right?
Sure.
And so obviously I've more than happily had all my kids baptized. And whenever we've had a baptism for the kids, I can see my dad especially, but also my mum really enjoying being in the church because for them it's nostalgia. You know, for them, he knows all the hymns. And so my dad is singing with a full chest when he's going through these hymns. My mum's never been quite that excited about it, but like my dad's singing with a full chest. And don't get me wrong, this is not criticism of my parents. So I love my parents more than anything. They're nothing but amazing, but they're a product of their time.
Sure.
You know, this was something it was in the zeitgeist. Everyone did this. Well, no, of course I'm not going to. That'd be uncool and stuffy and part of the old world. We're the new generation. We're the new world, and that's the world they grew up in.
Right. And we can sing the hymns the same way you might sing like "Ring Around the Rosie" or something. It's a nice little thing.
Yeah, exactly. For them, it's nostalgia, right? For them, it takes them back to their childhood when everything was safe and comfortable and warm, even if they had to do something they didn't like. Yeah. Well, I never learned the hymns. I didn't know any of the hymns. I don't know any of the hymns. I never had the opportunity to. And it's that continuity that the real damage to our civilization has been done. And so I'm not going to be a part of that breakage. You know, so when my son says he wants to be a Christian, that's fine. My wife now wants me to start going to church. I haven't started going to church yet, but I have a funny feeling at some point in the future I'm probably going to have to. and I say this as a very cynical Gen Xer.
Sure.
Oh, that's so boring. I don't want to, but I'm going to have to.
Right. And so the boomer, Richard Dawkins's boomer sort of approach to it is different from your own in the sense that it's you didn't have an experience, and you also.
But this is the thing. Yeah. He is lamenting. He loves. I mean, he literally said, "I love going to cathedrals. I love hearing the hymns,
Christmas carols."
Yeah, I want Christianity without the Christians. It's like, Richard, actually have a bit of humility here, right? You are literally telling us about something you love and something I could see in my parents that they love. I mean, my parents are never new atheists. Right? He's never brought up religion, so, but there's a difference with them and him. He dedicated the latter half of his life to destroying Christianity, to tearing this up as much as possible and throwing it out. And it's like, Richard, the thing that you love, you were instrumental in ruining. You know, you didn't begin the process, but you were definitely beating the horse to death at the end of it. And doesn't that require a bit of self-reflection on your part? Especially when you're looking at the alternatives, such as, say, Islam, which you have no nostalgia for, and actually, I think, rightly understand, and Dawkins has been a staunch crusader against Islam. You know, you can't give the new atheists any flack on that. You know, they've all been very anti-Islam. You know, but the cosmic balance is kind of coming due. And I do wonder if Richard Dawkins is like, God, was I actually doing the right thing? Should I have just shut my mouth? Actually, you know,
that'd be tough to do publicly. He's definitely not doing that.
Maybe he should, But in private, maybe he's thinking, God, well, what was I doing? You know?
And what was your reaction to that?
Richard Dawkins is Wile E. Coyote.
Okay.
Yes.
An animation of Canyon, and that clip was him raising the little help.
Sure.
Because he's looked down and realised he's not standing on it, and he's just about to fall along with civilization with it. He's essentially got to the stage that sort of controlling boyfriend has, where he's been so anxious about the holes in his relationship that he's told his girlfriend to frump up and put a jumper on, and then he's realising, I'm not attracted to her anymore. Oh dear, have I changed too much about the thing I originally loved? I think we're in danger of legitimizing cultural Christianity as a kind of cargo cult replacement for the authentic thing. And I think that's why cultural Christianity isn't taking hold among young people. Actually, especially in DC, there is a large contingent of Latin mass going Catholics. And Eric Kaufman's written about this, as has Paul Morland. The birth rates among those demographics are far higher than those among secular demographics, whether or not they're treating abortion as some kind of Aztec sacrament or indulging in trans ideology or sacrificing children to be in polyamorous unions or for the climate or something. Whatever malady has taken hold, liberalism is not an iterative ideology, but Catholicism and the like is. And what we need is sincere conviction. So I spoke to Dave Stark. He's a very good historian in the UK, very insightful, but a self-professed Nietzschean. And at last NatCon, he did a talk, and I walked up and asked him a question because he was talking about coronation and how we can base a defense of our civilization purely on history alone. very Burkean, completely on board with Christianity. And I said, David, if, much like Richard Dawkins, if you appreciate the cathedrals of Europe, how can you let them be contentless? Will they not be, as a Philip Locke in poem or Friedrich Nietzsche says, the mausoleums and sepulchres to a dead ideal, and then be converted into mosques, as we're actually seeing many of them now? And he said, Christianity is like English Shintoism. It's the English worshipping themselves, which did prove my point that Henry VIII was the original epicenter of woke. But he's absolutely wrong. I prefer the quote that my friend Harrison Pitt relayed to me, which is that a Christian is a baptized pagan. And so we can actually have our national identities be ergonomic with the recognition of a truth that works in all times and all places. And that is that, as you said, Christianity is wholesome and our enemies are practicing something evil. And I do think that even if you have quibbles about metaphysical convictions, you do need to believe in that.
What's interesting is the concept of something being able to work in all times and all places means that it can work in any contextual environment. So if we want to say, well, okay, England as a nation is particular, parochial, and belongs to us and not the rest of mankind, well, Christianity can work there as well as it could work anywhere else. And if you say, well, okay, well, Mexico is a very different country, yeah, okay, but that's great. That's great, because Christianity isn't a homogenizing force, is what we're being told.
Right.
You know, they were both Christian from their inception, and they're both very different. Well, that's fantastic. That means we've got a spiritual backbone that isn't going to turn us into globo-homogenized, blended human culture.
Yeah.
That's a great start.
Well, and the long philosophical debate between the one and the many. I mean, and so like being able to have both of those at some level is, if Christianity is true, then there can be both. Well, it's like a bunch of particulars and universals existing.
It's important to recognize. Yesterday, Josh Hawley gave Senator Josh Hawley a speech about how America is a Christian nationalist nation, that it's always been a Christian democracy. Even FDR was talking about this. What he didn't mention in his speech, though, is that it came from an English founding stock. And you can't change that, because as much as Blackstone's formulation was developed on the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, if I can find one righteous man in the city, you won't burn the whole thing. It took an Englishman to interpret it that way. Our particular character, bound by our geography, our weather, our culture, because pretty much every other civilization didn't interpret it like that. And it wouldn't be without the way that Christianity maps ergonomically onto the English that you would have the United States of America.
And the United States of America, the thumbprint, the fingerprints of the English are all over this civilization. Like, you were an English civilization. You know, you can I'll argue the toss and pretend that America fell from the heavens. And no, you have just English characteristics in your DNA of this country.
Have you seen the clip of Justice Scalia, Anthony Scalia?
And he said, I just felt like I was home.
Yeah, when he
Yeah, because you're an English civilization.
This Italian guy.
Exactly.
Italian-American fella.
Because he's been born and raised in America, and this is his world experience. He comes to England and says, oh, this is familiar. Yeah, it is familiar, actually. You know?
The Samuel Huntington book has gotten a lot of play recently. The Who Are We book about America. It's a book about America.
I haven't read it.
It's a book about American identity, and he opens it up, and obviously he thinks that American identity is, well, what he says is that it's this Anglo-Protestant thing. That's what American identity was. And then at some point, and I want to interact with his stuff more, but at some point he says, notice I didn't say that we need Anglo-Protestant people. And my antennas obviously went up, and this in a similar way of the Christianity thing. So like we can have Anglo-Protestant culture without the people, and the people are the carriers of this thing.
Where have culture come from?
Right.
Yeah. It didn't just emerge out of the ether.
And we can't. This isn't a husk. The people aren't.
This is the problem with the idea of a social contract society.
Yeah.
That you could have a civilization of rational devils and it would work. I don't want a civilization of rational devils, actually. I'd like a civilization of virtuous people. And the thing is, as well, one thing that this formulation has is it fundamentally casts a kind of illegitimacy on the ethnic character of the United States. As if you've done something wrong by coming from a time and a place and a history. Right. No, there's nothing wrong with that. This is what normal nations are. This is what all nations are. Right. You are a collection of tribes that form a nation that carry a story, a cultural heritage, a genetic inheritance, and everything else, all the baggage that comes along with it. And these things are so small you don't even realize them. And I mean, the way Americans talk the manners they use, the cultural expectations they have of one another, all of these things are born and bred into you. There's something you can't get rid of. They're intrinsic to your character. And so you can't just simply swap out Americans with a bunch of rational devils from somewhere else and say, well, there we go, Americans. It's like, no, there's a lot more to it than merely the thin, rational line of the social contract. Even if they can follow the rules, that doesn't mean that they are Americans.
Yeah, certainly. Anything to add to that?
You guys queue.
Okay.
You do battle.
Well, we line up.
Yeah.
You cue resentful.
Sure.
You still have the instincts of the English in some way, and that didn't come from nowhere. And we have this conversation at the moment here, and this wraps back around to Rishi Sunak. And I'll mention David Starkey again. David Starkey got in trouble at the coronation for saying that we have a prime minister who doesn't understand our culture. The same thing happened when Nigel Farage noted that Rishi Sunak abandoned the D-Day celebrations to go and record an interview for the election, and they immediately made it about race. But it's not reducible to melanin. And I do think the abstract categories of black and white and the like that come from America and have been exported elsewhere don't quite capture that. Instead, it's about a deep sense of belonging. Many people feel more at home in an airport departure lounge than they do in a particular place. And that's why it's not a question of values, because values change over time. But the idea that Thomas Jefferson is less of an American than Ketanji Brown Jackson now, just because she's an enlightened progressive, is absurd on the face of it. It's about identity, and it's about being inextricably there. And that's why the managerial class that rules us at the moment feels so alien. And that's why when Antonin Scalia goes over and he recognizes the heritage of his nation, he feels at home even in England. It's a question of belonging.
Basically, and this is an unfashionable word to use, but it's a question of tribe. Is this your tribe? Do you belong in it? Do you have a web of relationships that nails you down in this thing? And Scalia did, even though his blood wasn't Anglo, his tribe was the Anglos.
So he'd gone through all of the prerequisite membership rituals.
Yes, all of the 100%. And this is a difficult and unusual way for moderns to think of things, but humans are tribal creatures, and everyone knows it. Everyone can see it. Look at your politics. You red or you blue. You've got your tribes. Everyone's got their tribes, and the Enlightenment's worst conceit was to pretend that actually we could transcend the tribe. No, you can't. And it only worked for a while because you had quite a homogenous tribe to begin with. And now we're in the era of heterogeneous tribes. Well, we're seeing breakages and multiculturalism. Little Mogadishu, bringing back Ilhan Omar, who says, oh, well, my prime minister is Somalia. It's like, yeah, it's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence. Tribes are real, and we've got to be salient about it.
Well, I think that a lot of this does come down to the ancient temptation, the perennial temptation of dishonor your father and mother. It seems like the not wanting to belong to a tribe, not wanting to belong. It's very much I don't want any kind of heritage. I don't want I don't want to belong to anyone. I don't want to come from anyone.
I think that's modern and liberal. I don't think that's ancient. In ancient times, it's just unthinkable that you'd say such a thing. It's almost unthinkable that you'd have a different profession than your father. If you go by 500 years, right? That's a very modern, liberal. I mean, it's 20th century.
That's the conceit that we're born free and equal.
Exactly.
You're born inextricably dependent. And honor also doesn't mean obey. It means to pay what is due back. And I think modern liberal innovations that believe that all bonds are legitimate only on the grounds that they're consensual has broken this intergenerational chain of gratitude, and it's been for the worse. And for example, the Conservative Party in our country, when faced with the fact that nobody's having kids, so you can't propagate your own civilization, they said, okay, we'll do childcare so that you can send your baby off and the mum can get back to work and stuff. And that doesn't cultivate the cultural custodians that you need because the kids grow up resentful they didn't have their mum and dad around. So there's nothing to learn.
It's just the worst possible solution to the problem.
Absolutely.
But Connor makes a great point there, because when you just think about any aspect of your life, you realize how non-consensual it was. Right? You didn't choose your family, you didn't choose the place you were born in, didn't choose the language you learned, you didn't choose it, but they're all good things. They've all got good things bound up in them. And we need, and it's only liberalism that asserts that the only morally valid things are those things we have rationally chosen for ourselves. That's not true. There are good things that we didn't get to choose, and we should pass on to others.
It's been a wide-ranging discussion, and I thank you guys for sitting down for me. Let people know where they can find your stuff.
LotusEaters.com.
Lotus okay. Well, like I said, thank you guys for coming on.
Our pleasure.
I hope to talk to you guys again.
Yep. Thank you very much.